Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg. So I'm really honored to be here with Deanna Stinson-Reese, who is the Global DEI Strategist and Trainer as well at PowerToFly. And so I'm really excited because we are going to get into a good conversation today around showing up as your authentic self. So Deanna, I'll let you kick it off.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I am so excited for this conversation because, Sienna, I feel like you are the epitome of championing authenticity within the workplace for Black women. And it's so important, as we all know. And so when I saw this opportunity to be a part of this conversation with you, I was so eager to join and see how I can learn, just like the audience will today, about how we as Black women can really be intentional about showing up as our authentic selves and what that means in corporate America. So let's actually jump right in. I'm curious to hear your thoughts around what do you believe it means for Black women to actually show up as their authentic selves. We hear that term thrown around a lot, but what does that mean to you for us to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Deanna. I'm so happy that you're leading this conversation because you also embody authenticity for me on so many different levels. Um, and so for me, when I think about what does it actually mean to show up as your authentic self, specifically as a Black woman, something that I think is so important is the fact that in a lot of spaces, we feel like we can't actually be ourselves, right? We feel like we kind of have to be a chameleon to fit in, whether we're in this community or that community or this space or whatever it is. And it's something where even when it comes down to something as simple as like how we wear our hair, right? It's like something like
Exactly.
you just wear it in a ponytail. It's like, oh, but does this look unprofessional? Do I have to slick it
Mm-hmm.
back, etc. You know? And it's interesting because like when we think about this, it's asking ourselves like, number one, learning how to identify what actually is our authentic self, right?
Mm.
And that's something that take it outside of the workplace, but asking yourself on a day to day, like take away what society thinks, what your family thinks, what your job thinks, all of these things. And like, who are you actually, or who do you want to be? Like, who is the woman that you want to become, you know?
Mm.
And give yourself the time and space to actually try to figure that out. And
Mm.
understanding, and yesterday in a conversation that we were having, another summit conversation that we were having around Black women in business, we were talking about the fact that there's these stereotypes of being like the strong Black woman or someone who always has it together or who can't afford to kind of be juggling 17 different balls and none of them can drop, because if not, it's not just like, oh, I messed up, but it's like, I'm also representing women. I'm also representing Black people. I'm also representing Black women. And so you're kind of this representation for a whole lot of groups, right? When we
Yeah.
think about intersectionality. And so, number one, so going back to what the actual question is, the first thing that I would say is like, give yourself the time and space to actually understand who you are and realize that it'll take time, it'll take a lot of unlearning, and it'll take a lot of relearning to lean into that. And then also when it comes to like, how do you now show up in the workspace? Something that came up in a couple of conversations during this week. I know the topic is on elevating Black women, but a lot of women were
Mm-hmm.
asking, like, can we actually ever truly be ourselves? Right.
Mm.
And that's something I want to sit with, because obviously the way that you and I might be communicating to a stage of however many people are in the audience, hey
Mm-hmm.
y'all, versus like talking behind closed doors or maybe being at our family reunions or whatever that is, that'll look different, but like they can all still be parts of who we are.
Oh my God,
But
yes.
just like saying, like, in the same way that if someone wants to be professional, they're not going to talk in the same way they would talk to their husband or to their kids or to their best friend, and realizing that it's
Yes.
not always like changing who you are, but instead like adapting to the circumstances or being conscious of where you are. Um,
Oh my God, get on my head.
yeah. I was like, I'm glad we're talking about this together, because it's so true. And I think that there's this idea of like, when we talk about being authentic in the workspace, it's like, oh, but how can I still be professional? And it's like, no, you can be professional and be yourself, right?
Exactly.
You know, and like not think that it has to be one or the other. And I know that a lot of allies sometimes talk about, but code switching and all of this, I don't know, I did this, like code switching and all of this stuff. And it's like, no, no.
Yes.
Yes, code switching is something that exists, but there's a difference in saying, like, if you're someone who swears a lot and you're in a Zoom meeting, are you going to be swearing every 2 seconds? Probably
No.
not.
Yeah.
That's not code switching. That's being conscious of where you are in the room, you know?
Yes.
So I don't know. There's a lot that comes into it, but I definitely think it takes, before thinking about what authenticity means in the workplace, it means like, what does it mean for you,
Mm-hmm.
individual, before you think about what does that mean in professional context.
Yo, Sienna, you made so many valid points. And I'm so glad you mentioned, I'm gonna circle back to a couple of those points real quick. So ironically enough, right, we just had, Nicole and I had just had this conversation, what was it, Tuesday, when I was on for a session, and I was explaining literally, that's why I say, just get out of my head, right? Like, stop being in my head. We had like the same conversation around code switching, and I was explaining pretty much the same thing. Like, people view code switching as like such a bad thing. And I'm like, it's not always considered code switching when we are conscious and aware of who our target audience is or who is in the space that we're in, and showing up as whichever part of ourselves we feel like bringing to the table, right? Like, if I don't want you to see artistic Deanna, I'm not going to show you artistic Deanna, right? And so I was explaining that, and how when you think about code switching, we think about our artistic, authentic selves. I like to really kind of circle to this piece here and get your thoughts on thinking about that. Would you say that when you decide to switch how you come into a space or how you show up in a space because you feel like you are going to be ridiculed, or because you feel like you can't be yourself, is that then when you would kind of tell women that that should be a red flag for them as it pertains to how you're showing up, right? Like, so if I feel like, oh my God, I can't wear, I'm gonna use hair for an example, because you mentioned hair, and that's a huge issue in the Black community as it pertains to being able to show up as our authentic selves. If you have dreads, or if you want to wear your kinky curly texture out in its natural state, there are companies that have policies in place where that is considered unprofessional, right? Or against their code of conduct or their dress code, whatever it may be. And so when you think about trying to delineate really quickly around code switching and showing up as your authentic selves, would you say that when you feel like I cannot be who I am because I'm going to be reprimanded or ridiculed, outside of just simply being inconsiderate, right? We know that showing up cursing, that's kind of just inconsiderate, right? Versus that's just a little inconsiderate to just be swearing off like a sailor in the middle of a professional budgeting meeting for, the firm or something like that. It's just like, come on now. But outside of that, how would you kind of frame what would be those red flags for women to be looking out for, if that makes sense? I know there's a roundabout way of asking the question. You know how I do sometimes.
No, I love it. So this is a good question. So I was like, I'm gonna reiterate it to make sure that I'm fully understanding. So the question is, what would you consider are red flags when you actually feel like you can't show up as your fullest, as your most authentic self? Right.
It's specifically pertaining to when you want to know, like, man, I may be code switching versus I'm showing up as this particular version of myself intentionally on purpose.
This is interesting. Okay. So this is interesting for me for a couple of different reasons, right? When I was younger, and I feel like this is very common in a lot of women who might be actually watching, like, I used to be celebrated for sounding white, quote unquote. Right. So like, I was like, the pastor at my grandma's church would always be like, you speak so well. And like, they would congratulate me or be surprised because I was educated because I spoke white. And so for me, I had a lot of, in Spanish, it's like complejos. I had a lot of things when I was younger, because I grew up in Brooklyn. And then I also was like the only Black girl in my high school in a town of 5,000 people, upstate New York. Right. So it was this back and forth of like not feeling Black enough for the Black community, and then being the token Black girl in the white community. And so when I think about that for me, and I think about when I was younger, ironically enough, code switching mean like me trying to sound Blacker than what I actually sounded, and feeling really uncomfortable and being called out for that. Cause it's like, why are you trying to speak like that when you don't know how to speak like
it's
that?
Like, that doesn't fit you.
Yeah, right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so I bring this up to say that, like, I think a lot of the times when we talk about code switching, we talk about like what the dominant, like what society what the dominant way of speaking in society is. And that's, unfortunately, it's like how white individuals speak, right? And so we're saying,
Yes.
how are we changing who we are to speak like everyone else? And so going back to your question, I think the delineation for me is like asking yourself why, right? Because sometimes it's
Mm.
unconscious. Sometimes you're just like, oh, well, if I'm, I don't know, like if I'm speaking with my family or whatever it is, like I might sound a little bit different or I might not, but also just being able to understand, like, if I do make a conscious change, why am I making it? Is it because I feel like I won't be accepted? Is it because I feel like there's a sense of quote unquote danger of like not being able to feel like, or that it'll have a negative repercussion? Is it because
Right.
I'm trying to fit in, right? And so my background's in psychology and probably I think about stuff probably a little bit too much, but also asking myself, like, how am I feeling? And is this truth or am I projecting what I think other people are feeling? You know?
That's a very
Yeah.
good point.
And I
Sometimes
think
we'll create that in our minds.
yeah, and so like asking yourself, it's like, okay, so am I projecting that if I talk the way that I normally talk, X, Y, or Z, this person is going to judge me? Or is it like because I've heard them say something in the past that has had a negative repercussion when I do show up as my
Mm,
authentic self, right? And getting honest
gotcha.
with us about that, of being like, again, real talk, it was something I struggled with, of being like, I always wanted to sound blacker, but like I never did. And so I would be like, well, I was like, not to swear, but like, dang, like that's something that felt really unfortunate until I realized that like it's not about sounding black or sounding white or code switching. It's just like who you are and how you speak. You know what I mean? So
hmm
yeah. Anyway.
That's such a very good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, um, because that is something that even within the Black community, right, we have to be conscious of how we are supporting one another and not, alienating, this person because they don't, sound the way you think they should sound or verbalize their thoughts the way you feel like they should verbalize and articulate their thoughts. So that's a very good point. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that that's like a good segue, just thinking and hearing your story about like, this is really how I experienced code switching, in the past. So how did you get to a point, or can you talk to us a little bit about your journey getting to a point where you are being authentic in the workplace, like as a whole? Like, what was your journey like for that? And not to say that you've reached this like finish line or like the epitome. Yes, but you're very much so, I think it's obvious that you're very much so self-aware, and so that in and of itself is, I feel, a huge milestone to be self-aware enough to know, hey, this is how I show up as my authentic self in the workplace. These may be times where, I did not show up as my authentic self for whatever reasons. I'm sure you do some sort of analysis, self-assessment as to why, like you just explained, but talk to us about your journey getting to that point.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. So for me, again, like for anyone who's listening, I know that we're focusing on authenticity in the workplace and how that can lead to growth, but I really want us to zoom out and take a step back and realize before you try to figure out how to be authentic in the workplace, you need to figure out how to be authentic with yourself outside of the workplace, right? And so for my journey specifically, so fun fact, I'm originally from New York, but I've been living in Spain for the past 7 years. And
Jealous.
when I was like, anyone who wants to come visit when you can, we're here, right? um, but it was interesting because it really took me uprooting myself and starting over essentially, like without my past friends, my family. Like I love my family, they're my heart and soul, but like I had to uproot and literally just like be on my own in this entirely new context to figure out like who am I and what do I actually want, right? And I'm not saying you have to move to a different country at all, but I'm just going to share this part of my journey because I think it was really important of realizing that who we think we need to be is so ingrained in us that it doesn't matter where you are, but it's really being able to say, hold on, I think that I should be this way. Again, should, right? I should have this type of job. I should be doing X, Y, and Z by the time that I'm 30 or 40 or 50. I should have a house and 2 cars or whatever the quote unquote American dream is right now, instead of saying, what do I actually want? Right. And especially when we think about authenticity in the workplace. Like I was just having a conversation today and someone was like, you're really great with boundaries. And I'm like, thanks. The reason why I'm great with boundaries is because when I was, how old am I? When I was 23 or 24, I lost all of my hair to alopecia. It happened in like from one day to another. And it was because, so again, plot twist. So it's interesting because like I'm bald Iraqi and like, if you don't know me, I'm telling all y'all who are listening, but like, if you don't know me and I choose to tell you, you probably wouldn't realize, but like, I don't have eyebrows, I don't have eyelashes. Like it's something that happened from one day to the next. Why did it happen? Because I thought that like I should be doing the most, doing all these things. My body was like, bruh, you need to relax and chill out and like actually start taking care of yourself. And so when that happened, it was a huge moment for me to really like redefine myself and ask myself, what do I actually want? Like I joked with my friends, I was like, it's a rebirth, like when babies come out all over again. Anyway, I was like coping mechanism back in the day. But for me, it was really interesting to be like, Sienna, like, God, the universe, whatever y'all believe in, this is a sign for you to like slow down and actually ask yourself, who do you want to be moving forward? And it was hard because as we were talking about hair and everything, it's like hair, like being a Black woman in your hair is a lot of your identity. So when that gets taken away from you, at first I was like, okay, well, like I'll paint on eyebrows or like, do I wear wigs? What do I do? And I was like, hold on. I want to be the same person in my home with the comfort of people that I care about as I am when I leave my house. So I have to show up and like actually be authentic. Does that mean that people might make assumptions about me? Does that mean that people, because in Spain, like it's not that much of a diverse country. I'm tall, I'm Black, I'm a woman, and like I lived in smaller towns and now I was bald. So that transition was like, there were a lot of stairs, but like getting comfortable with that and realizing that like, I know who I am. I know what my story is. And like, I'm going to show up as my whole self no matter what room I'm in. Right. Again, I feel like when I talk about it, it's very chill, but like these were very pivotal moments in my life of having to do that searching. And so from that point forward, I was like, okay, well, like, who do I actually want to be and how can I make sure that I feel comfortable enough to show up as my most authentic self, no matter what room I'm in, and doing it in that way. So trying to remember what the original question is. How did I get to this journey? So there were a lot of different steps to get here, but like when thinking about it in the workplace, something that I had to get really clear on are like, what are my values and who is the woman that I want to be or want to become? And then being intentional about like choosing workplaces that support and respect that. I think a lot of the time, specifically as Black women, we're like, I want to get any job out there. I'll do whatever just to like get a paycheck. And it's like, no, but hold on. You have expertise, you have experience, you have skills. Your identity is such a beautiful part. So it's like, you need to realize that in the same time that you're going into an interview to interview a company, that a company is interviewing you, you should also be interviewing that company and saying, hey, can I show up as my real self here? And go in with a mindset of like abundance and worthiness of saying like, I deserve to be in a place that sees me and supports me. And if not, that's okay, because there are other places out there that will, you know? And so I really want to encourage all of you. That was a long story, but I really want to encourage all of you to like figure out who you are and like do that work, but then also realize that like you get to choose where you work. In the same way you get to choose where you live, you get to choose who you date, you get to choose all of these things. Like you get to choose where you work. So be conscious about that and not just say like, I'm going to do anything for $1, because again, society has taught us that like, if you have a job, that's good enough. So you shouldn't try to want or ask or do more, but instead really say that like, no, this is a conscious choice and I get to choose the culture, the company, et cetera, that I want to be in.
First of all, I'm gonna tell you the biggest thing that stuck out, and I want to make sure everyone writes this down. Sienna definitely said, in order to find your authentic self, we need to get up, we need to move to another country, along the beach, in front of water, okay, where it's warm, okay, so where the sun can beam on our melanated skin. That is what we need to do. That is what I learned from this story. No, kidding. But seriously, I think you did raise some very valuable points. And by the way, that is what I took away. So I'm going to just tell my family, like, Sienna said it. I see it. I've seen it manifest with my own eyes, so I know it works. So this is what I'm going to do. Okay. But aside from that, right, one of the things or a couple things that stood out to me when I'm thinking about some of the points you mentioned along your journey. And first, thank you for your transparency, right? Your vulnerability and your transparency to let people that are watching you from afar that may not know this about your journey, to be able to kind of glean in and know a little bit more about you, Sienna, your personal life. So as we're talking, all of you in the audience, please definitely chime in with any questions you have about her journey, and about the conversation as a whole, because we really want to hear from you as we're going through this conversation. But two things that I noticed in your story is asking yourself what it is that you want, and then why. And I think we'll ask ourselves to a certain degree, or others will ask us like, well, what do you want? And once that answer is given, there is no additional thought behind it as to like, well, why? So it's like, if you want to buy a house, okay, great. Why?
Yeah.
Right? Is it because you saw somebody else do it? Is it because, like, why do you want a house? And that's something that someone that I know, she's like gung-ho about, having a house. And I didn't consciously do this, y'all. So I'm not even gonna give myself any type of extra credit. I just was asking her why, because I felt like she was doing it because people around her were, buying houses. I'm like, I don't want to buy a house. Like, I want to buy land, and I want to buy it for a very specific reason. I don't care what nobody around me thinks about what I should have in my mid 30s, or as a business owner, or as a mother. I don't want a house, like, just for the sake of having a house. Okay. Like, I don't just want that. I'm okay with paying rent. Okay. Until I get some land. So I don't care if y'all think I'm throwing away money. Let me throw away my money, but I don't want to be responsible for everything when it comes to a property until I have land. So I think that that's super duper important. I encourage the ladies out there listening to really lean into that aspect of starting to figure out your authentic self. Let me see. So let's kind of pivot a little bit and think about, we've been talking about how to show up as your authentic self and how to understand who your authentic self is. Let's kind of pivot a little bit, and let's talk about what you would describe as conditions for authenticity within the workplace for Black women. So ladies, as we make this pivot, if you didn't have any questions before, this should definitely bring about some questions, because we all, I'm sure, in some facet are intertwined with corporate America, or with the workplace as a whole, the labor market. So, don't feel like if you're not in some Fortune 500 company, working some fancy role, that it separates you from this conversation. This is the labor market as a whole. If you work in any facet or capacity, we're talking to you.
Yeah, I love that. This is a great question, Deanna. So and I was like, I half repeat it so that everyone else, and then half repeat it so I make sure that I'm answering the right question. So the question is like, what are conditions to make sure that you're entering a company where you can be your most authentic self, right? The first thing that I would say is, let's be honest, right? So when we think about representation in a lot of companies, and like whether you're saying corporate, small businesses, whatever your 9 to 5 is, or whatever you want it to be, a lot of the times, unless it's a Black-owned business, you might be one of the few, or you will not be in the majority of who's in the room, right? And so something that I think is really important is like seeing who your allies are. And I say this because as Black women, and I was talking to Deanna Smith, she runs DEI at Thumbtack, and we kicked off the summit on Tuesday, but we were talking about the fact that, like, at the end of the day, allies have power, and whether that's because they've been in the company for a long amount of time, because they might be in leadership, whatever that looks like when you're interviewing, hear what the company culture is like. Take note of the people who you're speaking with, right? Are they degrading you? Are they questioning your worth? Are they questioning your expertise? If so, like, that's a good, like, red flag that we were talking about before. Like, that's something you should take note of. Instead, like, lean in and being able to also ask them, like, hey, how do y'all support inclusivity at your company? And from their answers, you'll be able to hear, like, okay, are they reading off a script? Do they actually know? Or do they actually believe in this thing? And so again, when I say, like, when companies are interviewing you, you are also interviewing companies. And so really leaning into that and hearing, again, don't ask, like, what are your DEI efforts, right? Because that's not what you care about. But actually ask, like, what is it like? What is the day-to-day like, right? And something else that I would also recommend this is kind of answering the question, kind of not. I would recommend for you to go on LinkedIn and see what their employee base looks like. And I think that that's something that is so important. Like, go on LinkedIn, see who actually works there. Number one, to be able to get a good sense. Number two, y'all should be doing your research before you apply for jobs. And then number three is like, actually get in contact with some of the other women of color who are working there. Like, I think that that's a great way to actually get a good sense of what it's like to be a Black woman in a company. It's talking to other Black women in the company, right? Seeing what representation looks like, seeing if the majority of their women of color who are working for them have entry-level jobs, or if there are some managers, or if there are some in leadership. And that will show you like, hey, cool, I have a clear idea of like where things are at. But really, again, like, I just want to encourage you all, like, thank you for asking the question around conditions, because again, like, you get to choose where you show up. And going back to what we were talking about before, like, y'all are going to spend X amount of hours for the next X amount of years at a job. And if you're going to feel like you're on edge, or like you have to be a different person, or that you can't actually show up or speak your mind or share who you are and where you're coming from, then like, that's going to be a lot of unnecessary stress for no reason. So like, I really encourage you to be diligent, and then also go at the process with like, I'm big on mindset, but like with an abundant mindset of like, if it's not this one, I'm going to wait for the right opportunity for me, right? Because at the end of the day, you're dedicating your time and your energy and so many other things into this job. So making sure that at the very least, you can feel like you can show up and that your thoughts, experiences, and stories are valued. Yeah, you're muted, love. You're good. I'm excited to hear what you.
I'm like so tuned in, didn't even realize I muted myself as I was listening, because I had a little tickle in my throat, so I apologize. But I love that you brought that up, and how you're keeping it connected to the power that we have as Black women, right? You choose where you work. No, like, you choose, right? You decide, I'm going to accept ABC position at XYZ company. And I want to pivot just a tad bit, because that can be deciding to wait, right? And say, I'm gonna hold off. That in and of itself can be scary. B, it can feel unrealistic or unattainable, for the simple fact of maybe certain life conditions that they're dealing with. And so I do want to pivot a little bit and talk about, what are some ways that you feel as Black women we can get support to be in that space of using that power, right? Because I know I encourage women to do this all the time, but I do have to always do a self-check for myself to say, like, at one point that wasn't you, right? You weren't always Miss, like, well, I don't need this, this job, or I don't need X, Y, and Z. I'll wait, or I'll, do something else. Because at one point it was, I need something, right? I don't have enough and I need more. Whatever that more is, I'm gonna take it because I need it now. So let's pivot and kind of lean into that, if you would.
Yeah. Okay. I love this, and thank you. So I want to personally say, like, I'm very privileged in the fact that I'm single, in the fact that I don't have a lot of commitments, in the fact that, like, privilege, not privilege, it's fine, but like, in the fact that I live in a different country, in the fact, like, I'm very aware that I have a lot of privilege where, like, I don't have kids, I don't have a lot of financial commitments, etc. What I do want to highlight is, and this is very top of mind because Deanna, you are a business owner. I am also a business owner. And yesterday we had a conversation around Black women in entrepreneurship. So I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to answer the question. But when we think about how many Black women are starting their own businesses, that have their own businesses, and that are also leaving corporate to begin their own businesses, why? Economic empowerment, financial freedom, and having a plan B. And I think that that's something that's so important, because a lot of the times, like, a lot of the women that I work with, it's like, I want to start something, but I don't know, is it worth it? There's so many other things out there. Where can I dedicate my time and energy? And like, something that I always say, like, I've always worked a full-time job while running my business. Because if we think about it, like last year during the pandemic, how many people got laid off? How many people didn't have a plan B? How many people were, unfortunately, at the end of the day, like as much as the company cares about you, when it comes down to, hey, we have X amount of dollars left and we have to let people go, they will let people go. As sad as that sounds, right? But asking yourself, like Myleik Teal, so she's an entrepreneur and the founder of Curlbots. She always says, stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? And like, that is one of my favorite quotes, because if you think about it, it's like, the reason why I want to, the reason why I want a business is because I genuinely enjoy impacting the lives of other Black women, right? So my business is focused on like teaching women how to essentially move abroad, find remote work, all that good stuff. And I love that. That's my legacy. Like, I want to empower women to be the best version of themselves that they can be. But also at the end of the day, it's like, cool. When it comes to generational wealth and when it comes to financial stability, I will not be able to make X, Y, or Z only by having a day job. What I do have is like, okay, well, if I'm running a business and I'm able to, over time, obviously this isn't going to happen overnight, but in 1 month, I can make X amount of money that might be close to what I'm making in a month or 2 months or 3 months. I'm like, cool, I can save that for a rainy day. So when it does come time for transitioning jobs, whatever that might look like, I can choose with intention. So that was just a little, like, I really encourage all of you, if any of you have been thinking of like starting your own thing, a side hustle, a passion project, whatever you want to call it, like, I really want to encourage you to do that. And like, you can still find a job, you can still have a career, do it in the early morning, do it before you go to bed. I would recommend in the mornings while you have mental energy, if that's your time, but like dedicate time and energy to doing that. But if you don't have that opportunity right now, something that I will say is, these two things are aligned. Like, if you're saying I don't have time, money, or energy to wait for a job that feels aligned, that's fine. Find a job or find the job that you can, but make sure that you are learning from that job and from that experience and applying it to whatever you want to have come next, right? Yes. And really learning that, like, it's interesting, right? Like, so when you're working at a job, like, you're learning skills, you have resources, you have support, you have all these things. Don't let that go to waste. Use that and then figure out, how can I position my past experience to now set me up for whatever that next step might be in a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. Oh my God. You hit the nail on the head. First of all, that's a testament, even if you are in a situation where it's a little bit of desperation there, right? And you need something. It's about being strategic and intentional. So, and that's something that at the time for myself, back some years back before I started my business, right, did not realize that that was necessary, right? You can be at a point where it's like, I absolutely need something else, right? And I can't afford to wait, but you still can make it a strategic move, right? Even though we know, let's say, I don't want to be an IT specialist. Oh, I hate IT. I don't want to be an IT specialist, but I need something else. And that's what my current skills align with. Great, cool. Go be the IT specialist. But then while you're in that role, being intentional about extra projects you may pick up, all those different things that will allow you to position yourself, like she said, for the next thing. It's staying ready so you don't have to get ready. That circles around all of that. And I love that you mentioned that, because that is the story of my life. Yeah. If something happens and I'm not ready, I'll be like, see, I know better. I'm supposed to stay ready so that I don't have to get ready. So that is awesome. Sienna, do you mind if we start taking some questions from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Because I think this was a really great question, with me being a mom too. And I told y'all, what I heard her say earlier was, I need to move in order to find my authentic self. So, Sienna, Bianca wants to know, do you work with moms?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, because again, although I'm not a mom, a lot of the moms, okay, so quick context on what I do. I know we're talking about corporate in the workplace, but we teach, in my business, we teach women how to find the clarity, career, and community they need to be able to build the life they love abroad. Something that is the dopest about the women that I work with is, because a lot of times you think, well, I have to be a certain way or have X, Y, or Z, but it's really like, we have tons of women over the age of 50, right? We have tons of moms. We have moms with young kids. We have moms who have kids that have already left the nest. We have women who are transitioning, women who run their own businesses, all of it. And so again, like, bring this all to say thank you for asking that, Bianca. And just like, I want us to remind ourselves that no matter what our current situation is, like, we are still capable of reinventing ourselves, right? And we are still capable of figuring out what we want. And again, when we think about this, Deanna, you and I talk about, I was like, I don't know if we talk about this a lot, but I feel like we do.
We do. We probably do, because we talk about it a lot.
But like, when thinking about legacy and when thinking about the generations to come, like, again, I don't have kids right now, but I do have a younger sister. And so like, that's what I think about it, being able to say like, what is the future that I want to leave for those who are going to come after us, right? Mm-hmm. And when we're moms, I feel like that sits with us so much heavier, because it's like, no, like, how can I show up as the best version of myself and be in a place to do that, so that my kids can see that and like have that be a direct reflection of like, oh, this is what life can look like. And then they grow up with this whole new mentality of what's actually possible for us, especially because like, yeah, anyway, I was going to go on a whole rant of like the States right now, but that's a whole nother keynote for us to talk about.
I love it. But no, let's stay here very briefly, because a follow-up to that would then be, how did you actually like find positions to move abroad, like remote positions? Like if somebody wanted to do a remote position and move abroad, like how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Deanna. So number one, I would say you're in the perfect place, because PowerToFly will literally connect you to companies that have remote jobs. So like, y'all are here, and this might be your first time because you're here for the Elevating Black Women Summit, whatever that is, but this is a really amazing platform. And also part of the reason why I decided to work here, again, choosing with intentionality, is because like, we literally work with companies that are invested in, number one, inclusivity, and number two, like being able to give you the ability to work remotely. So how did I do it personally? This was a while ago, but like, I started off teaching English, which is something that was very simple. And then once I had my foot in the door and like, I got myself grounded, really became a part of the Spanish community, Spanish culture, then I started working for a co-living space that I was just thrown into the world of remote work, and all of this about 5 years ago. And then since then, while I was doing that, growing my business, but I decided to make the move just because, again, like, I asked myself, what do I really want? Not what should I want? And then started taking baby steps to get there. So Shannon, if you are interested in remote positions and moving abroad, definitely I'll have Arushi like drop my Instagram in the chat, and y'all can connect with me there. And we can continue the conversation. But if y'all are interested in remote positions, again, we're having a virtual career fair tomorrow's Friday, tomorrow, where you can get directly in the room here at Power2Fly with companies that are hiring remotely. So that's an easy win, an easy checkbox. So definitely check that out.
Exactly. Yep. There you go. There we go, ladies. So talk about opportunities and intentionality, being intentional about showing up to something where you will be able to communicate with decision makers that are hiring for remote roles, right? So, and let's look at how the pandemic has kind of reshaped how we all just view the concept of remote work. I think before, while remote work existed, it was just kind of like this thing, this one-off thing, right? Where it seemed like it was such a necessity to be in the actual office. Whereas now we have learned and seen, oh, there's really not a serious need to be in the office for a lot of roles out there. And so I'd say if remote work is your thing, definitely make sure you show up on tomorrow for that job fair. Sienna, I think that you brought up another good point around how we have, so at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about these different perceptions and stereotypes of what it means to be a Black woman, right? Juggling a million and one things, et cetera, et cetera. But then how normalized it has become for us to, as Black women, to now be in a space where it is normal for us to have our 9 to 5, but some other stream of revenue, right? Typically through maybe a business or a side hustle or something of that sort, or another gig. And I do want to just amplify the encouragement that you gave the ladies out there that are like contemplating, wondering, whether we should or shouldn't. Like, ladies, if you have the capacity to do so, I definitely would encourage you, just like Sienna did, to do so, because that's how I grew my business. Started off having the 9 to 5, doing curriculum development for career courses for high school and middle schools, and it evolved into me having the time to start my business. At first, I was like, I hate this. I don't want to do this. Like, this is not what I went to school for. It was like one of those things, but it ended up being such a strategic role, because what did I end up doing for companies? Creating trainings, consulting, like stuff that embodied those fundamentals I learned through being in education for a short time. And it also allowed me the time to do it and to develop the type of work ethic that was needed. So that abundance mindset that you talked about, and really looking at the glass half full versus half empty, you can take something away from any and every position that you are in. Is whether or not you choose to. So being very cognizant about that as well. And now, as I'm thinking about just the certain conditions in corporate America, right, and different systemic structures that we have, Sienna, let's actually talk a little bit about what you've seen, what you've observed, what you have learned as it pertains to the systems and structures that are currently in place at many companies that may create or that may perpetuate a culture that doesn't allow for Black women to safely show up as their authentic selves, right? So you may have Black women showing up, but it's not, they're being reprimanded for it. What have you seen? What have you learned? What have you observed just over your course of consulting, over your course of just working, and even maybe some things you've heard from colleagues that you know?
No, this is a great question. I was like, there's a lot to lean into here, right? But
sorry.
I want to, no, in a good way. Like, the first thing that I want to say is, like, in a lot of companies, when you look around the room, right, and this doesn't matter if you're an ally and you're listening, or if you're a Black woman, et cetera, a lot of companies, when the individuals who are in the room look around the room, they're able to identify various people who look like them, or who went to their schools, or who have shared experiences, whether that's socioeconomic background, past jobs, if they go to the same golf club, like whatever that is, right? And a lot of the times when you're comfortable in a space, it's very hard to realize that you're comfortable because everyone in the room is like you. And so what happens really often is that you have someone who's from, I don't like saying marginalized groups, because it's like marginalized compared to who, right? That means that we're comparing it to anyway, it's fine. So what am I trying to say? Like,
this is Sienna, y'all, every day, all day.
My whole authentic self.
Yes.
And it works, But I love it because then again, it's like when you're someone who is used to be one of the onlys or something, you're a lot more conscious of that, right? So imagine if you are the only woman and there's only men around the room, you're going to want to have more women in the room, right? If you're the only Black person or person of color in the room, you're going to want to have more people in the room. So at the very least, it's like you have someone to look across the table and like wink when you hear a comment that you know is a little bit off, right? So going back to the question, things that I've observed, a lot of the times it's not until there's a sense of awareness that there's actually change. And so something that we talk a lot about when we do DI work and DI consulting is like, first you need awareness, then you can take action, and then you can have accountability, right? But if there's no sense of awareness, if there's never anyone to like raise a red flag or to like show up and be like, hey, something's off here, right? Like there's never going to be change. And I think this is so important because again, like part of my authentic self is like, I will always say what I like, for the majority, I will always say what I think and feel, right? Will I always be comfortable doing it? Maybe not. Will I think, ooh, I'm getting this visceral feeling in my body when I do so, but I know that like, hey, that means you probably should. Yeah. But what happens is that like, sometimes when you do, granted, at PowerToFly, we have an amazingly safe and inclusive culture, so I feel comfortable enough to do that. But if no one raises a hand and says, hey, something might be off, then companies normally don't make change, right? But something that has been happening, I was like, this is a good and a bad thing, right? So like since last June, since the murder of George Floyd, a lot of companies are saying, hey, diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. We realize like that was a sense of awareness of like, we've got to do more and we've got to do better. And on one hand, it's very frustrating and angering that like it had to literally be something that's extreme. That happens often. It happens probably on a daily basis, but never so publicly. But having it be that for people to be able to say, hold on, this is a sense of awareness that we need. And so now you have a lot of companies where they are being more intentional about, hold on, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion actually mean? But then going the next step and wanting to take action. And so I think that this, if I'm being honest, I was talking to Raw Goddess earlier during the summit, who's amazing. If y'all haven't checked out that that conversation, I definitely recommend that you do. But we were talking about, I lost my train of thought. We were talking about, we were talking about the fact that right now is a really powerful time for Black women, right? And I say this because people are intentionally saying, hey, how can we bring in more diverse voices, et cetera? And like, I want to remind y'all that like, you aren't going to be there because you're checking off a box. You're going to be there because you're worth it. And you're going to be there because like you have the expertise and experience. But if people are trying to like hire more women of color, more Black women, dope, get your foot in the door and then start making change. And like, I really do recommend that like showing up authentically. It's funny because we had someone join our team, and I'm hearing that like there's a lot of conversation around toxicity in the workplace for people of color. Again, so true. And it's like sometimes it's small steps and small changes or small conversations that make action, right? And I'm going to keep leaning on allies, like again, and I'm saying this not to be like we need white allies to be our saviors. That's not the case. But what I'm saying is like when you do have white allies who can also intentionally be like, y'all, something's off, and doing it not from a place of like wanting to pat themselves on the back, but being intentional about it, it's like, that's when change matters, because there's literally statistics around if I'm championing for Black women in the workplace, it's going to be a me cause, versus if you have someone who isn't a Black woman championing, it's going to be like, oh, maybe we should think about this for any type of group out there, right? And so it's really important to be able to say, like, find the people who are in the company that are actually about it, you know what I mean? And then start making small moves for change, but also like, this isn't your burden to bear, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't for you. This isn't supposed to be more mental or emotional toll for you, because like, you're there to do your job. You're there to show up and do your job, and you don't have to be the spokesperson for Black people. But what I am saying is that like, the more that we normalize these types of conversations, the more that we can actually start bringing awareness to the fact that there should be some type of change.
So then I would ask, us knowing about how toxic the workplaces are for people of color, knowing how the recent uprise of social injustices and just, the day-to-day battles that we deal with around social injustice and racial inequality, how can Black women, what are your recommendations for how Black women can deal with that? Because we know there are some companies that are not talking the talk and walking the walk, basically, or not walking they're not, you know what I mean? Like, they're doing performative DEI. They're doing performative DEI, basically, right? They're saying they're all about DEI, but they're really not doing anything about it. They still have these toxic workplace cultures. So I want to, because I know we're running low on time, I really want to make sure that the ladies can walk away with some tangible tools on how do I deal with this, right? I'm in a company, other than, applying for something else. How do I cope and survive in this type of environment?
The first thing I was going to say is take your PTO. Like, and that seems so simple, but like, take your time off. If you have PTO, please take it, because you burning yourself out in a toxic environment, that's not going to do anything. right? And like, that sounds so simple, but again, like one of my core values is self-care. Because again, if you don't take care of yourself, they sure as heck won't do it either if you are in a toxic workplace, right? So something simple, take your PTO. Something else you can do is find a community of other women in your field, or find a community of other women who have similar jobs, because a lot of the times it's like, I'm sure, I can't see the chat right now, but I'm sure y'all are connecting, right? Which means that when you find other like-minded women who share experiences, at the very least, you have a support system. That doesn't always have to be your family, that doesn't always have to be your friends, but like, find other women who you can share with. Maybe it's just like talking about it after the end of a long day, whatever that looks like, but find your community. And the last thing that I would say is, I'm going to go back to something that we were talking about before, is like, start working on your own thing little by little. And I say this because that will be your out. And I promise you, and like, that will be your guiding light, because you'll be saying, okay, well, I hate what I'm doing. My workplace is really toxic, X, Y, and Z. But instead of viewing that as your end goal, say, okay, well, this toxic workplace, I'm going to save as much as I can. I'm going to create my plan so that I can exit. And I'm going to start building whatever's next for me. And again, it can be 30 minutes a day, an hour a day. When I first started my business, I literally did not dedicate more than 2 hours a day max. And it grew into literally an international business that got pressed by like all over. Anyway, that's not what this is about. But what it is about is starting with small steps and using or having the mindset of, if you are not happy in the workplace, using that to like fund whatever's going to come next for you. And yeah, and I just think that that's like really what it is. And take your PTO, because again, like, if you have it, take it. Companies have it for a reason. And if they don't support that, then that's something else that like you can raise a hand and be like, well, why does this exist? Anyway, go ahead, Deanna. I'll have you ask the last question.
You're so funny. No, that's dope. I'll also add, because I know Sienna talks about this frequently too, but if you may want to invest looking into, therapy as well, if you feel like it is really straining on your mental and emotional wellness. And a lot of companies have EAP programs that may give you 1 or 2 sessions for free. I don't know what every company's EAP program looks like, but I know a lot of companies that I've consulted, they don't really talk about it a lot. Like, they wasn't really encouraging Black professionals to like take advantage of these resources that we have, internally, that, people may not use. So, I know it's currently more awareness in the Black community to normalize mental health and therapy. So I would also add that in as well for you ladies, because that's something that Sienna champions for. It just didn't come out just now. That's okay. Because the PTO thing was that simple thing where it was like, duh, but we don't do it, right? It's like, duh, take your PTO, but we don't do it because we feel like we can't do it. But remember, if something happens to you, your job gonna be online to get filled within 24 hours. So take that PTO. My last question, really quick, because we got like literally 3 minutes. So I'm gonna give us 3 top ways that you think companies can cultivate an environment where women feel safe showing up. So what are 3 tangible things that companies can do to create an environment where Black women can start to feel comfortable showing up?
I love that. Number 1, ask Black women what they need. Because a lot of the times we'll create stuff or programs or ERGs or whatever, and it's like, actually ask the people who are in your company, what do they need? And then show up and provide that for them, right? Number 2, be not critical, but like be self-aware, again, around like who's at the table and what those tables look like. What tables are getting served leftovers and what tables are getting served the 5-course meals, Because although there might be tables where people are around it, like, are they having the same kinds of meals, conversation, service? I don't necessarily know, right? And the last thing that I would say for companies that do want to show up is have more Black women in leadership. And I say that because representation is everything. For people who are interviewing for you, they're going to notice, hey, is there anyone that looks like me in this company? Is there anyone that looks like me that's a decision maker? Is there anyone that looks like me that, if they're showing up as their authentic self, right? That's it. And like, I'll end with a very short story, but I remember we were having a team meeting. And someone had recently joined our team on PowerToFly, not the DEI team, but like the team in general. And they sent me a message being like, hey, it was so amazing to just see you show up as your authentic self in our weekly meeting. And like something as simple as like having video on, right? And realizing that like representation means a lot more than what you could think. So I just want to encourage all of y'all that are listening to show up as your authentic selves. Definitely connect with myself and Deanna. And Deanna, I'll have you close. I realized I was like doing part moderation.
No, it's all good. All good. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you all for your questions. Sienna, thank you for your authenticity, your transparency, and for all those nuggets you dropped. Ladies, please follow both of us on LinkedIn, Instagram. Find us on Facebook, wherever you can find us. We're out there, and we're out here trying to help Black women to show up as their authentic selves and thrive in their careers. Yeah. So thank you so much again, Sienna, and I'm gonna pass it back over to Megan to get us transitioned over to the next topic.
Thank you so much.